Welcome to Vault Studio.
This is Story Vault Studio. She had $1.2 million, a signed apartment contract inches from her pen, and a life she'd worked 5 years to build. And then a single text message made her tear it all in half. Not for a scam, not for a joke, because the friend who sent it never lied to her, and he was telling her to run. What follows is one woman's choice to trade 4 walls for 4 wheels, to fill an RV with everything she'd need to survive the end of the world, and to find out months later that the safe haven she'd been fighting to reach was never safe at all. This is a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and what's left standing when the world burns down around the people who refuse to leave each other behind. If you enjoy immersive stories like this, consider subscribing. Now, let's begin.
The pen hovered an inch above the signature line, and Margaret Hawthorne finally let herself smile. 5 years of overtime, 5 years of takeout dinners eaten at her desk, and it all came down to this. "Whenever you're ready," the agent said. Her phone buzzed against the table before she could touch pen to paper. She glanced at it, expecting a calendar reminder. It's a message from Ryan Vance. "Don't sign anything. Get supplies now. A virus is spreading in DC. People are turning into something. I'm not kidding, Margaret. Go!"
Ryan didn't send messages like that. Ryan sent memes and complaints about lab funding. He did not send all-caps warnings. Her thumbs moved before her brain caught up. What are you talking about? I'm literally mid-contract right now. The reply came back instantly. I'm serious. It's real. Please. Then nothing. Margaret stared at the screen until the agent cleared his throat. She looked up, and something in her face must have changed. She picked up the contract and tore it down the middle. "I'm sorry," she said, standing so fast her chair scraped the floor. "I'm not buying the apartment. You should start stocking up on food. Not for a week. For a year." She had Ryan on the phone before she reached the parking garage. Chaos poured through the line, drawers slamming, metal hitting a floor, a flight being paged. "Margaret, did you see it? You need to move, now." "I saw it. I just tore up a home contract in the middle of a closing." "What? You're joking. Wait, are you insane? How are you going to evacuate?" "I didn't sell my car. I'm trading it in. For an RV." A stunned silence. 5 years, Ryan. If what you're saying is real, I'd rather have 4 wheels and a roof that moves than 4 walls that don't. Be careful, please. You too. The line went dead. The dealership owner blinked at her, like she'd asked him to build a rocket ship. "I need the most reliable RV you've got. Long-haul capable, big storage. Price isn't the issue. I need it today." He recovered fast. "We can absolutely make that happen." They settled on $100,000 for a used but well-kept Class A motorhome. Diesel engine, storage bay big enough to sleep in. She signed the paperwork standing up, engine already running in her head. The gas station was next. She filled the RV's main tank to the brim and loaded 20 extra containers of diesel into the undercarriage bay, stacking them tight enough that nothing would shift on a rough road. Then she drove straight to the biggest supermarket she could find and started clearing shelves like she was preparing for a war. Because as far as she was concerned, she was. Case after case of compressed survival biscuits, canned meats, canned fruit, vacuum-sealed smoked meat, bottled water by the dozens. dehydrated vegetables, flour, rice, a camp stove. The store manager watched her clear an entire aisle and laughed, not unkindly. "You heading off to explore the end of the world or something?" She just gave him a tight nod and kept moving. A stock clerk helped her haul everything into the RV until the interior looked like a warehouse on wheels, food stacked floor to ceiling, a folded solar panel wedged into a corner, a flashlight, waterproof lighters, rope, a folding shovel. By the time the last box was loaded, it was 4 in the afternoon. Traffic moved normally outside the store. People walked their dogs. Everything looked exactly the way it always did. Margaret knew, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that it wouldn't stay that way much longer. The moment she cleared the main roads, she caught something in her mirror. Another RV, similar build to hers, holding a steady distance behind. She changed lanes early, angling toward a side road winding into the hills, and the RV behind her changed lanes too, matched her exactly. Her pulse kicked up hard. She eased off the gas, drifting toward the shoulder, letting the other vehicle overtake her. As the 2 RVs passed, she turned her head on instinct. The driver did the same. Their eyes met for one bare second. A guy about her age, tired and wary. He wasn't hunting her. He was running from the same thing she was. There was a place deeper in these hills, an old bunker she and Ryan had stumbled onto as kids, half-buried, hidden and solid. Over 3 miles from the nearest town. The drive stretched on as daylight thinned toward evening. Eventually, the tree line opened up around the mouth of the bunker. She parked, grabbed the shovel, and went in to check the place over. Dry, spacious enough. She cleared the weeds choking the entrance and angled the vehicle until it sat flush against the opening, sealing it like a door. Only then did she climb back inside and try Ryan again. The call rang out into nothing. Less than a day left, according to his message, before whatever this was reached full boil. Even out here, the pressure of it sat on her chest like something physical. Her signal bar had dropped to a single flickering line. She opened a forum anyway, scrolling out of nervous habit more than anything. A user named Liam had posted 20 minutes ago. He'd walked past the ER entrance at the city hospital and seen people foaming at the mouth, thrashing, restrained by staff before being wheeled into isolation. Under that, an anonymous post had been climbing fast. "My sister's a nurse. Those patients aren't acting sick. They're acting gone. They bite." Margaret clicked into a photo further down, grainy but unmistakable. Hospital staff in protective gear carrying a stretcher, wrists and ankles bound. The panic on the onlookers' faces wasn't staged. She created a throwaway account and typed a single reply before she could second-guess it. "This is real. Believe it or not, that's on you. Stock up now. Find somewhere out of sight and don't come out." She closed the app. That was when she heard it. A small, dry, scraping sound just outside the bunker mouth. Not wind through leaves. Something clawing at the grass by the entrance.
Her chest locked tight. She grabbed the entrenching shovel, held her breath, and crept toward the sound. It grew closer, layered now with a thin, pitiful whine. She raised the shovel, ready to swing, and a small shape stumbled out of the brush. A cat, barely more than skin over bones, walking crooked, calling up at her in a weak, cracked meow. Margaret's whole body sagged with relief. She tossed a compressed biscuit toward it, and though the cat eyed her with open suspicion, hunger won out fast. Running her hand over its head, she found no fever, no swelling, just a shallow scrape along its side. As she cleaned the wound, the cat suddenly turned its head and nudged its forehead against her wrist. A thread of pale white light flickered across its brow. At the same instant, her wrist warmed, faint and strange. She named it Lucky. She'd barely finished settling it into a corner of the bunker when her phone buzzed. Ryan's name lit up the screen. "Margaret, I made it into the city. Are you okay? Everything's ready. Don't worry about me. I'm at the National Research Institute. I managed to grab a few vials of a suppressant." She cut him off. "No, there's no time for that. Find somewhere to hide right now. I'm coming to get you." "Don't! It's not worth the risk. I'm already moving. Stay put." She hung up before he could argue further. The closer she got to the city centre, the more she braced for fire and screaming, the collapse she'd pictured driving out. Instead, she found something worse in its own way, a wrongness dressed up as normal. People still moved along the sidewalks, faces tight and pale, walking faster than they should. A few had a strange, hitching gait, mouths slick with something that wasn't spit. Nobody went near them, nobody asked if they were all right. She followed the pin she'd dropped for Ryan to a small hotel and parked in a blind spot across the street. He was already waiting outside, jaw tight, a black backpack clutched to his chest. Then she caught it, a figure stumbling out of the alley beside the hotel, drifting straight toward Ryan. Her heart slammed into her throat. She cranked the wheel and sent the RV surging toward the hotel entrance. "Get in!" Margaret grabbed the shovel and swung it into the thing's skull with everything she had. Ryan threw himself into the passenger seat. "Margaret," he managed, breath ragged, "you saved my life just now." They drove nearly half an hour before someone burst from the sidewalk, waving both arms, screaming her name. Her cousin, Penelope Langley. "Margaret, please let me in. There are monsters everywhere out here." Margaret looked at her, flat and unmoved. "What exactly are we to each other? Get out of the road." Something in Penelope's expression snapped. They made it back to the hills without further incident and got straight to work fortifying the entrance, a perimeter of steel fencing, the RV sealing the mouth of the bunker like a final door. Once everything was locked in place, they finally allowed themselves to breathe, splitting a packet of compressed biscuits and a bottle of water between them. The signal on Margaret's phone had dropped almost to nothing. One push notification managed to crawl through, a reporter's dispatch describing hospitals overwhelmed overnight, patients spiking fevers and seizing without warning, unprovoked attacks spreading through wards. Ryan and Margaret looked at each other, and neither one needed to say it out loud. The thing they'd only half believed was real had already arrived.
15 days into the outbreak, the bunker was still holding. The screaming outside had grown thicker, spreading further into the hills each night. They set strict rules for themselves, rotating watch shifts, rationing food and water down to the last portion, wasting nothing. Out here, every scrap of supply was borrowed time. By day 30, the phone signal had died completely. No more news, no more forum posts, nothing but silence from the outside world. Margaret pulled out the mini drone she'd bought on a whim and started flying it out each afternoon along the forest trail. Ryan spent his hours buried in the research documents he'd carried out of the institute. Lucky turned into their most reliable sentry, patrolling the bunker perimeter every single day. Little by little, the three of them settled into a rhythm that almost passed for normal. By day 50, their food and water had thinned down to almost nothing. At the pace they were burning through it, they wouldn't last much longer holed up in one spot. They decided to trust the drone's scouting and step outside for the first time, searching for a water source nearby. Margaret and Ryan suited up in whatever protective gear they had and made their way down to a creek not far from the bunker. The forest held the occasional wild animal, skittish and on edge. No sign of the infected close by, though distant screaming still drifted in from the outer edges of the woods every so often. They gathered what edible wild greens they could find and carried them back. The trip eased some of the constant dread pressing on them. On day 68, Margaret ran the drone through its usual pass around the hillside. What came back on the screen made her breath catch. Deep along the forest trail, a cluster of figures was moving together, 2 men and a woman. Something about the woman's build tugged at her memory. She pulled the drone back, never realizing the woman below had already tilted her face up towards the sky, spotted the small shape hovering above the trees, and curled her mouth into a slow, knowing smile.
Margaret turned to Ryan, voice tight. "There's a group moving through the woods behind us. We're going to cross paths eventually. I don't think we can stay here much longer." They started packing, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble.
2 days passed in tense silence. No further movement showed up on the drone feed. One afternoon, thin sunlight slanted through the gaps in the bunker until Lucky shot upright without warning, back arched, a low, urgent growl building towards the entrance. Something's wrong, something's coming. The perimeter fencing was already being torn away by force, and a sharp, grating voice cut through the noise. "Margaret, I knew you'd be hiding out here. Let me in. You can't just watch me die."
They didn't waste a second discussing it. They bolted straight for the RV. A man's voice barked from behind Penelope. "Nobody move. This blade doesn't care who you are." "They've got a whole RV, look," Penelope chimed in, practically salivating. "Hand over the food and the vehicle, and we might just let you live." Behind the group, not far off at all, a handful of infected were closing in fast.
"The hell are you talking about?" the man snarled and loosed an arrow straight toward her face without warning. A sharp, splitting sound cracked through the air. When she opened her eyes, the men had been thrown clean off their feet, slammed into the rocks nearby. Lucky's forehead was glowing white, its eyes gone an eerie red. "Lucky! Ryan! Get in the truck!" They didn't hesitate. The RV tore free of the swarm closing in around them. "Margaret, how could you do this to me? I will never forgive you for this."
Once they'd broken clear of the shelter that had kept them safe for 3 months, both of them felt the same dizzying wave of relief that came with narrowly escaping death. What was that back there? Lucky, it protected us. I don't know either. Maybe Lucky's our lucky charm, or maybe something bound the 2 of us together that night, whatever it was. Lucky glanced up at her and gave a small nod, almost like it was agreeing.
"Food's almost gone," Ryan said. "We need supplies or a safe place, fast." They drove the RV from one abandoned supermarket to the next, across the surrounding area. Every single one greeted them with the same wreckage. Anything edible had already been picked clean, and the infected loitered thick through the aisles, drawn instantly by the sound of the engine. Over and over they were forced to peel away in a scramble, never getting a real chance to search.
Margaret steered the RV into a hidden corner behind an abandoned warehouse, cut the engine, and killed every light. She and Ryan huddled together in the dark to rest. She pulled out the drone, hands trembling. It seemed to sense how bad things had gotten, letting out a soft, broken little meow, like it was trying to comfort them both.
She flew the drone east in the dark, its battery holding strong, the feed staying clear. Another day passed with no sign of a supply point. The second day turned up nothing either.
Nothing on the third day. Hunger dragged her towards something close to blacking out. Even the air around them seemed heavy with despair.
Then, early on the morning of the 5th day, the screen finally showed something different. Along the eastern edge of the city, unmistakable signs of human activity. This had to be the shelter they'd been searching for all this time. Margaret grabbed Ryan's shoulder, shaking with excitement. "We found it, Ryan! We actually found somewhere! Thank God! We're going to make it!"
The RV surged toward the eastern edge of the city, closing in on the shelter. A patrol spotted their vehicle and waved them down. Margaret slammed the brakes with the last of her strength. Neither of them could stay upright any longer. They collapsed against their seats and lost consciousness together. When Margaret came to again, she was lying on a soft bed, the sharp bite of disinfectant hanging in the air. A medical worker in white protective gear stepped over the moment she stirred. "You're finally awake. We've run the tests already. No signs of infection. You're safe now." The days that followed passed quietly inside the shelter. Food and water came without fail, and her body slowly began to knit itself back together. Everything about the place had the shape of order. Medical staff cared for the survivors. Patrol teams kept watch along the perimeter. It looked exactly like the safe haven she and Ryan had pictured, calm and stable. It wasn't until later that she stumbled onto the truth, a sprawling laboratory tucked out of sight, and the discovery that everything about this place was a lie built on a massive scale. Row after row of sealed containment tanks held things suspended inside them, human in shape, every one of them stripped of anything resembling awareness. Margaret clapped a hand over her own mouth, too horrified to make a sound. Buried further in, she found leftover experiment logs and tore through them without stopping. This shelter had never been built by any legitimate rescue operation. It was a facility running experiments that fused human and infected biology together, chasing some higher-order organism meant to seize total control over what remained of humanity. The substance they'd injected into Lucky had a name, Sissia. Whatever power Lucky carried hadn't been some gift, it had been an experiment gone wrong, a subject that had simply escaped before they could finish with it. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridor behind her. "So, you found us out, did you? Clever little thing, aren't you?" Her pupils blew wide with panic. She turned to run and knew instantly it was already too late. A strange gas hissed out from a vent overhead, and her body went slack, every muscle refusing to answer her. They pinned her down, forced a dose of Simventure into her system, and shoved her into an observation room. Ryan and Lucky were already there, unconscious. Nothing seemed wrong, not at first. Day by day, though, her body began to change. Vicious dizzy spells hit her out of nowhere, and her sense of self started to blur and slip, worse the moment night fell. That was when Ryan's hand closed around her arm, a silent signal to stay quiet. He pulled a syringe out from inside his jacket. She recognized it instantly, the suppressant he'd carried out of the institute. Neither of them knew if it would hold, but there wasn't anything left to lose by trying. They injected themselves with what remained. Day by day, their minds sharpened, clearer instead of murkier. The researchers, baffled, responded by pumping them full of an even heavier dose of Sinia. Eventually, they wrote the two of them off as a failed batch and dumped them outside the shelter to die on their own. The infected closed in around them slowly, and Margaret finally lost the fight and slipped under. The last thing she caught was a small, familiar meow. "Lucky, is that you watching over me again? I don't think I can stay with you much longer, though." When she opened her eyes again, the surroundings were unfamiliar, and Ryan sat slumped weakly against the wall beside her. Dark blue-green patches had already begun spreading across his skin. Her own condition wasn't much better.
The same marks climbed her neck and forearms. She looked at him and forced out a broken laugh. I'm sorry, I dragged you into this. So what happens now? We just get eaten faster?
Ryan pushed himself closer to her, his voice suddenly, quietly, serious. Margaret, I'm sorry. I think I have to go first. Then he reached up and pressed his hand against the back of her neck. Through the haze pulling her under, she heard Lucky let out a low, warning growl. When she woke again, it was night. She turned her head, and only Lucky sat there, watching her with worried eyes. Ryan was already gone, no trace of him left behind. Grief hit her all at once, a heavy, aching weight settling into her chest. She forced herself upright, weak as she was, and a notebook slid off her lap and hit the floor. Ryan's research records. She flipped through another page and found his handwriting waiting for her. Margaret, forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye. There's one dose of suppressant left. I know we can't both come out of this. Before your parents passed, they asked me to look after you. Consider this me finally keeping that promise. Get it to a real research institute. Lucky will watch over you. You have to keep going. Her eyes blurred with tears. Ryan, you idiot. That night, she held him beneath a tree and cried until she had nothing left. She had to carry his research forward, get herself and Lucky to a real shelter, wherever that was, finish what he'd started, and live long enough to see the world come back into the light for the both of them. She lost track of how long she walked, across empty fields, through towns stripped bare and abandoned, through more brushes with death than she could count. Finally, one evening, lights flickered into view in the distance, a heavily guarded outpost. Right as her legs threatened to give out for the last time, she pressed the notebook into a rescue worker's hands. Tears streaked down her face. Please, use this. Find the cure. My friend gave his life for what's written in there. The next time she woke, a full month had passed. Warmth she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember wrapped around her. Sunlight spilled bright through the window, pooling across the floor. The city outside had colour again. It wasn't grey anymore. It wasn't dark. Half a year later, the research team finally finished a working cure. One that didn't just treat the infected, but cleared every last trace of ciccasia from the body. The nightmare, finally, was over. Afterward, Margaret sold the RV that had carried her and Ryan through every impossible night of that ordeal, and used the money to buy a small house in the rebuilt city. It wasn't much, but it was warm.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing for more. We'll see you next time. See ya!